Here in the beginning of Siman Tov Kuf Lamed, which is in the beginning of Chelek Vav, Baruch Hashem. We are beginning on page Beis, which is the page before page number 4. The Mechaber says in Sif Aleph, Tov Kuf Lamed Chol Hamoed Osur Biktsas Malachos Umutter B'Miksasan. Shulchan Aruch tells us that Chol Hamoed is Osur in some malachos and Mutter in some malachos. Says the Ramah, Lefi tzarech ha'inyan shayanir l'chachamim lahatir. And those malachos that are mutter on Chol Hamoed are those that, according to the need of the inyan, the chachamim saw to be matir. That is the Mechaber and the Ramah in Siman Tov Kuf Lamed. And now we're going to see the Mishabura. The Mishabura begins in Sivkot and Aleph Umutter b'Miksasan malachos ha'mutaras b'Chol Hamoed hem chamisha. There are 5 types of malacha that are mutter on Chol Hamoed. Number 1, davar ha'aved im lo ya'asenu ata. Something that will be a loss of money if not done now on Chol Hamoed. It could be a loss of money. Davar ha'aved. That's number 1. V'tzarchei ha'moed, things that are a need of the moed. And in the brackets he writes, Hainu l'tzarch ochol nefesh d'mutter afilu ma'isa uman. If it is for food consumption purposes, then if it's a tzarach hamoed, it's mutter even in a professional way. K'mo shekasav reish siman tov kuf lamed gimel. Aval shiur tzarach hamoed, but other needs of the moed that are not ochol nefesh, dafka ma'isa hedyot, it has to dafka be in an unprofessional way. K'mo shekasav b'siman tov kuf mem v'tov kuf mem aleph. Number 3, ubishvil poel she'ein lo mayochal. If there's a worker that doesn't have any food to eat and he needs to make some kind of parnasa, so it's mutter to have him do malacha. V'tzarchei rabim. Number 4 is it's of a need of the public, and number 5 is ma'isa hedyot afilu l'yochid. If it's for an individual and it's a non-professional job that's being done, so that's like we discussed before in the brackets. If it's shiur tzarchei moed, if it's not for ochel nefesh, then it's mutter only if it's a ma'isa hedyot, even if it is for a yachid. The isbar kol echad b'mekomo, as you can probably imagine, we'll get into all of these 5 heterim in the appropriate place in Hilchos Chol Hamoed. V'hinei be'ikr iser melechas Chol Hamoed yesh deos ben harishonim. This is the ikr nekuda that we want to discuss in the shiur tonight, and that is that there are different shitas in what exactly is their iser malacha on Chol Hamoed. It's the Mishabura is going to bring 2 shitas, and then we'll see in the Bir Halacha a 3rd shita in the Rishonim. Yesha sovrim shehu midivrei sofrim. There are those who hold that the iser of malacha on Chol Hamoed is purely an iser midirabanan. Mipnei shematzinu batorah shenikru mikra kodesh. We find in the Torah that Chol Hamoed is referred to as mikra kodesh. So we see there's an aspect of kedusha to Chol Hamoed. V'harehu zman chagiga b'mikdash. And also in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, during Chol Hamoed, you were able to do tashlumen on your korban chagiga. You were able to bring your korban chagiga. For those 2 reasons, lefikach asorum ba'asiyas malacha. Therefore, Chazal saw to it to aser malacha on Chol Hamoed. Kedei shelo yeh keshar yemos achol she'ein b'hen kedusha klal. We don't want Chol Hamoed, which is a mikra kodesh. It has a level of kedusha, and you can bring the korban chagiga on Chol Hamoed. So we don't want it to be like a regular weekday that has no kedusha at all. Mikom makom lo achmiru bo ki yom tov mamish. However, when the Rabbanan instituted the Isser Malacha on Chol Hamoed, they did not make it like a regular Isser Malacha that we have on Yontif. They kelu b'chamisha dvarim hanal, and therefore they were lenient in these 5 things that we discussed before. And if you look at note number 1, we'll just point out a couple of other things that they were lenient on as well when it comes to Chol Hamoed. V'chein le'inyan muktzah. So too when it comes to muktzah, kasav l'kamam, we'll see later on in Tov Reish Lamed Ches, she'ein isser l'taltel muktzah b'Chol Hamoed. There is no isser of moving muktzah on Chol Hamoed. V'chein kasav adarchei Moshe, shalom atzinu she'nesar tiltul muktzah b'Chol Hamoed. We don't find the muktzah as asar on Chol Hamoed. So besides the 5 things we saw before, here we see an additional thing that we'll discuss later, and that is there's no isser muktzah on Chol Hamoed. If you skip to the end of note 1, the last paragraph, another interesting thing that they did not answer on Chol Hamoed, u'le'inyan iser v'daber davar. We know on Shabbos you're not allowed to talk about cholvik things. You're not allowed to talk about your work. You're not allowed to talk about weekday things. However, when it comes to Chol Hamoed, the hainu ha'im aser l'daber odos dvarim she'aser la'asosem b'Chol Hamoed. In terms of whether you're allowed to discuss on Chol Hamoed those malachos that are forbidden on Chol Hamoed, das lagono shel mazaman orbach shemistaber shelo nemar klal iser zeh b'Chol Hamoed. Says the Shlomo Zalman, it is logical that this was not asked on Chol Hamoed whatsoever. You can discuss even the malachos that you can't do on Chol Hamoed. They can be discussed and planned on Chol Hamoed. You could discuss your business activities that are asur on Chol Hamoed. You could discuss it on Chol Hamoed. And he proves it from that's what we're going to see later on that the Mishabura brings down. Even something that a Jew can't do for you on Chol Hamoed, you can give it to him on Chol Hamoed for him to do it afterwards. So obviously you're doing the V'daber Dover, you're obviously discussing what you want him to do, so you're allowed to do that preparation on Chol Hamoed. So two things that we see in this note, besides the five things that the Mishabura brought down, there's no Isra of Muktzah, there's no Isra of V'daber Dover. Continues the Mishabura weiter. V'harbe poskim sovrim shehu min haTorah. Now, besides the first sheet that we brought down that holds that Isra Malacha on Chol Hamoed is purely midirabanan, there are many poskim that hold that it's daraisa. Now, if you look at note number 2, we're going to see a couple of nafkaminas. One is from the Bir Halacha, that we'll see part of the Bir Halacha. One nafkamina is from the Bir Halacha at the end of the next page. Who cares? What's the nafkamina if it's daraisa d'Rabbanan? You can't do malacha on Chol Hamoed, you can't do malacha. Why does it matter if it's daraisa d'Rabbanan? So the Bir Halacha writes over here in our sif, le'inyan safek b'malachos Chol Hamoed. You're not sure if something's a malacha Chol Hamoed or not. So if malacha Chol Hamoed is an issa daraisa, so that safek is a safek daraisa. You have to go to chumrah. If the issa malacha Chol Hamoed is purely d'Rabbanan, it's safek d'Rabbanan. You can go to kula. That's nafkamina number 1. That is the only nafkamina the Bir Halacha brings over here. They bring a few more nafkaminas. I'd like to read the last one, which is the last paragraph in note number 2. And that is from the Shevet HaLevi, Rav Vosner. He writes, Od nafkamina, le'inyan ovar v'asa malacha b'mezid b'Chol Hamoed. A person did the wrong thing, and b'mezid he did malacha on Chol Hamoed. Ha'im ne'aseres olav b'hano k'mo ma'aser Shabbos she'aser b'hano. If you do malacha on purpose on Shabbos, you go and cook b'mezid on Shabbos, so that malacha you did on Shabbos is aser b'hano on Shabbos. So will malacha that you do b'mezid on Chol Hamoed, will that be aser b'hano as well? Shim hi midaraisa ne'aseres b'hano. If it's an issa daraisa, so it'll be aser b'hano. If midarabanan, it'll be muteres. Ulamaisa hiniach betzarachian, he leaves off betzarachian. But that would be nafkamina number 2. If you went ahead and did an isser b'mezid on Chol Hamoed, so if it's daraisa, now you can't be nenef from the malacha that was done. And if it's midarabanan, you can be nenef from the malacha that was done. Continues the Mishabura. So we're going now in the poskim that say that malacha on Chol Hamoed is midaraisa. And that which we see, the 5 things discussed before, everyone holds that they're mutter on Chol Hamoed. So if it's the Rabbanan, it makes sense. The Rabbanan assered some things, and they didn't asser other things. But if it's daraisa, so how do we have these 5 things that are mutter? So says the Mishabura, V'hadi kilu b'kama dvarim hanal, hu al pi ha-reshus shenitan l'chachomim min ha-Torah b'melechas Chol Hamoed lefi tzarech ha'inyan lahatir. As the Gemara discusses, the Rishonim discuss from the Gemara in Chagiga, the Torah answered Malacha Chol Hamoed, but the Torah left room for the Chachamim to determine what exactly is going to be Asr from the Torah and what's not going to be Asr. So the Torah gave Chazal some leeway to determine what should be Asr midaraisa and what should be Mutter. This is all darshan in the Gemara Chagiga Daf Yudches. This is how the Ramah ends off when he says, so if it's coming, the Ramah says it's coming to be matir, it sounds like the Ramah is going with the shita that holds that really a malacha is going to be asa min ha-Torah, and therefore the Torah left room for the Chachamim to be matir certain things. If it's only asa min Rabbanan, so no one was matir anything, the Rabbanan only asered certain things. There was no reason to be matir it. They only asered what they felt should be aser. Everything else remained the same. But if it was aser midaraisa, and the Torah left room for Chazal to say certain things are mutter, it makes sense the lashon of the Ramah that the Chacham were the ones who were matir. Says the Mishabura weiter in the second to last skinny line, one has to be extremely careful not to be more lenient than Chazal was lenient for us, according to either shita. According to the one who says the Rabbanan asered only certain things, so certain things they left mutter. But certainly according to the one who says that it's aser midaraisa, and the Torah left room for Chazal to matir certain things, you can't take that heter too far. The Amru Chazal, because Chazal tell us, mevazas hamoados, one who is disgracing the Yom Tovim. The Hainu sha'usa behen malacha kapirish Rashi. Rashi learns that means that one who does malacha on Chol Hamoed, ki'ilu oved avodos kochavim mazalos. It's ki'ilu your oved avodah zara if you do malacha that is aser on Chol Hamoed. And then the Mishnah Berurah says, Gam chayav lechabed Chol Hamoed b'machal uv'mishta uksus nekiah. You're also chayav to honor Chol Hamoed with food and with drink and with clean clothing. Shelo yinhag b'hen minhag chol. One should be not knowing on Chol Hamoed like he is during a regular weekday. He shouldn't be knowing like minhag chol in the way he eats, drinks, and he dresses. Umaril lavash hakater shel Shabbos. The maril would wear his outer garment of Shabbos on Chol Hamoed. V'ayin la'el simin tov kuf chav tes of beis of Mishnah Berurah sham. And look what we learned in the last simin in Hilchos Yantiv. The mitzvahs v'samachto b'chagecha v'gomer koi gam al Chol Hamoed. That the mitzvah of v'samachto b'chagecha of being happy on the Yantif applies as well on Chol Hamoed. Umavur sham kates and mesamchum. We discuss over there exactly how you mesameach, what you give the kids, what you give the wives, and we also discussed what the husbands do for simcha. We'll come back to all this shortly when we finish up the Mishnah Berurah. V'kosu ha'achronim, the achronim write, the after muchach b'simen kuf pei chesiv zayin the einu mechuyev le'echol pas dafka b'chol hamoed. Even though it's clear in simen kuf pei ches, which is halachas of birchas hamazon, that you're not mechuyev to eat bread specifically on Chol Hamoed, that's learned from the halacha that if you forget yalav yavo on Yantif, where you're mechuyev to have a suda, you must go back and bench again. But if you forget yalav yavo on Chol Hamoed, you don't go back because there's no chiyuv suda. So there's no specific chiyuv suda on Chol Hamoed. V'rak the aser lesanos. It's only that you're not allowed to fast on Chol Hamoed, but not that you have a chiyuv suda. Mikom makom lechatchila mitzvah lekboa suda lapas. However, there is a mitzvah lechatchila to be kovea suda on bread achas b'layla v'achas b'yom, one suda at night and one suda during the day. To cave on the mitzvah lechabdo b'achilo shasiyah. Since there's a mitzvah to honor Chol Hamoed with eating and drinking, the ikar achilah hu lechem, the ikar eating is bread. Therefore, there is a mitzvah. There is no chiyuv. There is a mitzvah to have a suda night and day on Chol Hamoed. But since there's no chiyuv, that's why the halach is you would not go back if you forgot yalav yavo in benching. Now let's turn to the bir halacha for a moment. If you turn to the second page, to page 4, we're going to read the third shita. We had so far in the Mishnah Berurah shita number 1 that it was an iser d'Rabbanan, malach on Chol Hamoed, and shita number 2 was it was an iser d'Oraisa, but the Torah left room for Chazal to matir certain things. So if you look at Bir Halacha over here on page 4, in line number 7, at the end of the line, the Haramban hitil pshara. The Ramban made some kind of compromise between these two shitas, whether malacha on Chol Hamoed is an issa d'Oraisa or if it's an issa d'Rabbanan. Shekol malacha she'eno l'tzarech hamoed. Any malacha that's not needed for the moed, ve'eno davar ha'ovid, and it's not something that's going to cause a loss of money, human Torah. Anything not including those two things is an isser malacha mid'Oraisa on Chol Hamoed. V'shehi l'tzarech hamoed, but something that's in need of the moed, he muteres af malachas uman. That's muter mid'Oraisa, even if it's a malachas uman, a professional job. The af agav the ispe tircha yisera, even if it's a very big tircha mid'Oraisa that is muter. The chein kol davar ha'avud, and so to anything that will be a loss of money. Af al pi she'eno tzarech hamoed, even if it's not a need for the moed, but you're going to lose money if you don't do it. Muteres, that's also muter mid'Oraisa. The af agav she tircha yisera, even if it involves the big tircha on chamoed, it's muter. So mid'Oraisa we have certain malachos that are mutter and certain malachos that are aser. The chachamim midivrayim asru ktsas malachos. Within that category that the Ramban says the Torah was matir, the Rabbanan came in and asered. The ikar Chol Hamoed vaday dvar Torahi, but the ikar isra malacha on Chol Hamoed is for sure d'Oraisa. Velozah hiskim Rashba so paragama d'avodah zara v'ritva b'mechiltin. That's what the Rashba agrees to, and the Ritva. We'll stop there in the Bir Halacha. To summarize the three shitas, we have one shita that says malacha on Chol Hamoed is only aser midrabanan. That's the simplest. The second one holds that malacha on Chol Hamoed is mid'Oraisa. Anything that's aser on Chol Hamoed is an iser d'Oraisa. But Chazal left room for the Chachamim to matter what they think should be mutter. So you have things that Chazal said should be mutter, and everything else is aser mid'Oraisa. And then you have the shita of the Ramban that certain malachos are aser mid'Oraisa, certain things are mutter mid'Oraisa. But the Rabbanan came along and added more isurim, so you have isurei d'Rabbanan. In other words, according to the other shita, there's no isurei d'Rabbanan. There's isurei d'Oraisa, and things that the Torah allowed the Rabbanan to matir. But it's either isur d'Oraisa or it's mutter. According to this shita, you have things that are asur mid'Oraisa, things that are mutter d'Oraisa, and then things that are mutter d'Oraisa, the Rabbanan came and aser. That's the pshara of the Ramban, that you have some things that are asa d'oraisa and some things that are asa d'rabbanan. Those are the three shitas in the Rishonim. Now, there's a question over here that's really from the last siman, which is from Chelek Hey, just to point out the kasha, and then there's a very, very long Sha'ar Tzion, and we'll try to see a lot of the Sha'ar Tzion, maybe all of it, and that is a Sha'ar Tzion in Oz Daled. It's most of the page over here on page Beis. But just to point out a shtickle stira, which makes you wonder what's going on a little bit, in the beginning of the Mishnah Berurah that we had tonight, in the beginning of Tov Kuf Lamed, the Mishnah Berurah says approximately, I think it's the 9th line, he says, Mipnei shematzinu b'Torah shenikru mikra kodesh. That Chol Hamoed is called mikra kodesh in the Torah. I'd like to read you a Mishnah Berurah that we had in the last year. The Mishnah Berurah says, this is on page Kufnun Gimel Chelek Hey. It's the Mishnah Berurah in Sifkot and Tez Zayin. It's Siman Tov Kuf Chav Tes, the last siman. He says, "Ayin b'Rambam Perek Vav Milchos Yom Tov Degam Chol Hamoed Hu B'Chlal Moed L'Inyan Simcha." That we actually quoted tonight. The Rambam says in Milchos Yom Tov that Chol Hamoed is also included as the Moed L'Gabe Simcha. Aval L'Inyan Kavod V'Oneg Ein Chayav B'Chol Hamoed D'Lo Nemar B'Hen Mikra Kodesh. But then the Mishnah Berurah says, but Kavod V'Oneg, you're not Chayav on Chol Hamoed, because it doesn't say by Chol Hamoed Mikra Kodesh. Here we say explicitly, B'nei shematzinu b'Torah shenikru Mikra Kodesh. So is Chol Hamoed called Mikra Kodesh, not called Mikra Kodesh? What exactly is going on over here? It's a very confusing thing. So the Sha'ar Tzion addresses this more at the end, but we'll read through the Sha'ar Tzion. It's very insightful into how we have to dress and what we have to eat on Chol Hamoed. So the Sha'ar Tzion Oz Daled is going on the first wide line of the Mishnah Berurah, where the Mishnah Berurah says, Gam chayav lechabed Chol Hamoed b'machal uv'mishto uksus nekiya. Says the Sha'ar Tzion, this is the Magen Avram b'shem Tanya. V'chein isa b'mechilta parshas bo v'hedya kavosei. And the same thing is brought down in the Mechilta. Elo demashe kosav Tanya, but that which the Tanya writes, Kishar Yom Tov, that you're going to have to be mechabed, you're chayt to mechabed Chol Hamoed b'machal v'mishchus nekiya, like the other Yom Tovim, hishmatati. Says the Chavetz Chaim, who wrote the Sha'ar Tzion and the Mishnah Berurah, that I left off in my quote. De la'aniyos daiti, in my humble opinion, ein lahachmir kol kach bazeh. We should not be so machmir l'gabe the achila, the shtiya, and the clean clothing on Chol Hamoed like we are on Yontif. Da Rambam beperek zayin mehilchos Yom Tov hevi gam kein the Chol Hamoed nikra mikra kodesh. The Rambam in Perek Zayin Hilchos Yom Tov brings down the Chol Hamoed is called Mikra Kodesh. The Afal Pikin, even so, but Perek Vav Milchos Yom Tov, in the Perek before Hilchos Yom Tov, Sheher Tiksham Bedin Tazayin Chiyuv Kibud Va'oneg Mitam Mikra Kodesh, when he's discussing the Chiyuv of honor and delighting in the Yom Tov from the pasuk of Mikra Kodesh, Lo Hatiku Rak Le'inyan Yom Tov. He only mentions it about a chiyuv of achila and shtia and oneg and kibud only l'gabe yontif. V'lo le'inyan Chol Hamoed. He doesn't mention about Chol Hamoed. D'sham lo hetik rak mitzvah de simcha. By Chol Hamoed he just mentions simcha, but not the mitzvah of kavod and oneg. Shma mina de svirle. We see from here that the Rambam holds, de le'inyan Chol Hamoed ein lahachmir bazeh. When it comes to Chol Hamoed, you don't have to be machmir the same way that you have to by yontif. V'al korachach tzarech lomar, and you're forced to say, the after Chol Hamoed nikra gamke mikra kodesh. Even though it's true, Chol Hamoed is called mikra kodesh, and the Rambam writes that mikol makom kevan de le'inyan malacha min haTorah mutar b'Chol Hamoed. Now the Rambam holds malacha is only the Rabbanan. Since when it comes to malacha, midaraisa malacha lefi the Rambam is mutar on Chol Hamoed. V'al kol panim b'davar ha'avid mutar l'kuli alma. And like we discussed before, if it's davar ha'avid according to everyone, it's mutar. Harei de'ein kedushaso chomer k'mo Yom Tov. So we see the kedusha of Chol Hamoed is not as chomer as the kedusha of Yom Tov. The same halachos are not aser. V'lachein gam le'inyan kibud ein le'damosa l'Yom Tov. Therefore, when it comes to kibud of Chol Hamoed, we can't equate it on the same level as Yom Tov. V'zeu nira das HaRambam. That appears to be the sheet of the Rambam. Umad mashma me'amechilta hanal detzarech lechabdo ba'achila u'shasiya u'ksus nekiya. That which we quoted the Mechilta as saying that you have to have a kibud of Chol Hamoed of achila and shtia ksus nekiya. Yeshlomer dahainu lechabdo yoser miyamos hachol b'chol zeh. It just means that you should be mechabed Chol Hamoed in eating and drinking and clothing more than a weekday. Aval einu mechuyev l'damoso legamri bazel Yom Tov. But you don't have to equate your Chol Hamoed clothing and your Chol Hamoed eating to your Yom Tov. Demi mikra kodesh shalo yalfina bechagiga yudches lachat tana de'asa b'melacha b'chol hamoed. One Tana learns from there that it's taka asa midaraisa melacha and chol hamoed. Va'afilu hachi mikelinan bei b'davar havid, and still will matter lefi that shita in the davar havid. Harei de mikra kodesh shalo kil mi mikra kodesh yom tov. We see clearly the mikra kodesh of chol hamoed is not as chomer as the mikra kodesh by yom tov. I'll prove it to you further. That like we said before, you're mechuyev to eat bread on Yom Tov. That's why, like we said before, if you get Yal V'Yav, you must go back, because the Chiyuv Suda, there's a Chiyuv of having bread on Yom Tov. Chol Hamoed ein mechuyev le'echol pas. And on Chol Hamoed, there's absolutely no Chiyuv to have bread. Hooray, after tzarech lechabdo ba'achila, you see clearly, even though there's a mitzvah to mechabed chol hamoed ba'achila, ein chiyuvo gadol kolkach. It's not such a great chiyuv like on Yom Tov. V'chein hu adin le'inyan malacha de mutter bo davar avid. We see the same thing by malacha, that it's mutter if it's going to be a loss of money. V'al keinira, therefore it appears the af le'inyan ksus nekia ein mechuyev ki Yom Tov atzmo. Therefore says the Chafetz Chaim, when it comes to clothing, you're not mechuyev to wear Yom Tov clothing on Chol Hamoed. Rak yoser mimei hachol. You only have to wear nicer clothing than during the week. V'chein b'simin tov reish samech dalet siv gimel b'magen Avram mashma l'chorda b'chol hamoed levado Hoshana Rabbah. It's mashma there for the Magen Avram that by Chol Hamoed, besides Hoshana Rabbah, ein haminog lilbosh bigdei Shabbos. The Magen Avram says the minog is not to wear Shabbos clothes on Chol Hamoed besides Hoshana Rabbah. Maharil that we brought over here, who wore his outer garment of Shabbos, the Ovid l'nashehu the Ovid. He was doing his own chumrah. Mikol makom yoser mimei hachol vaday tzarech kol adam linhal v'kanal. But it's pashut, you have to be wearing nicer clothing than you do during the week, but lav dafka that has to be as nice as Shabbos and Yom Tov. V'ayin le'el b'simin tov kuf chav tes v'mishaburas evkatan tezayin. This is what I was reading before. She'atakti mehagraz le'inyan kibud va'oneg ein chayev b'chol hamoed lo nemar b'hemikra kodesh. That was the mishabura I quoted before. He quotes the Graz that you're not chayev in chol hamoed because it does not say mikra kodesh. You're not chayev in kavod va'oneg. V'hinei etzem din zeh muchach me'arambam kemo shegasadna. That's clear from the Rambam, like we mentioned before. Achein mashe kosav de lo nemar b'hemikra kodesh tzarchian. But that which he says that Mikra Kodesh is not written by Chol Hamoed, that needs investigation. That Rambam Asmo Perek Zayin so over the Mikra Kodesh going Gam al Chol Hamoed. We just said before, the Rambam says in Perek Zayin that Mikra Kodesh is in fact going on Chol Hamoed as well. V'cheinu gam kein min hagenu b'tfilas Musaf b'Chol Hamoed. Our minig is also that in the tefillah of Musaf on Chol Hamoed, she'omrim Mikra Kodesh zeichel yitzias Mitzrayim. We call Mikra Kodesh on Chol Hamoed just like we do on Yom Tov. V'cheinu das ha'achronim le'el b'simin tov tzadis of Gimel v'tzarachian. So these are tzarachin that you can say Mikra Kodesh doesn't apply over here. V'dasa Magen Avram b'simin zeh ki Tanya. The Magen Avram goes like the Tanya. U'beprat shekem avur b'mechilta v'kanal el dechiyuvo b'kol zeh kil miyom tov kemo shegasadnu. The bottom line is that although there is a chiyuv of stepping it up on Chol Hamoed from weekday, but it's certainly more lenient than on Yom Tov. Ve'efsher degam hagraz model azeh. So that's a very lengthy Sha'ar HaTziyun, but a very important Sha'ar HaTziyun that tells us that we don't have Mikra Kodesh as Chomer on Chol Hamoed as we has on Yom Tov. Let's see the Mishabura Vaitis of Katan Beis. Let's finish up the Siman. So we said in the Ramah, Lefit Tzarech Ha'inyan Shal Yanir Lachamim Lahatir Mokom Shenogu Hamon Lahakir Lafilu B'Davar She'enu Ovid. In a place where the minhag is to be lenient in malacha, even when it's not a davar ovid, so you really shouldn't be mekil. But the minhag is in that place to be mekil. Uba chacham ve'asr lahem, and a chacham moves to town and he tells him it's asr and he asers it. L'migdar milsa. Afilu davar ovid. He comes to make a geder. He says not only is it asr when it's not a davar ovid, he asers them even a davar ovid, which is normally mutter. But l'migdar milsa, he's machmer on them and says even a davar ovid is going to be asr. Ein l'chacham achir lahatir lahem. No other chacham should come in and be matir for them. Once the chacham comes, he feels a geder has to be made. He makes a geder. He asers even davar ovid. So another chacham should not come in and be matir it. Isa b'Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi says, Omer Rabbi Abba Bar Mamul. Rabbi Abba Bar Mamul says, Ilu hoya misha yemana imi. If I had someone to count in with me, he tarti shiu osin malacha b'chol hamoed. I would have said that it should be usher to do malacha on chol hamoed. In the brackets, hainu mikachu mimkar. It means business dealings, v'chiagavna, and similar things. Davar she'eino malacha gemura. He doesn't mean 100% full malacha gemura, but some aspects of malacha, if it was his choice, he would have matired it. Why? Kulum asar lasos malacha elo kadeshu ochlan v'shosin v'yigayim b'Torah. Isn't it true the reason why that the Torah or Chazal, depending what shita you go with, they asar malacha on Chol Hamoed, so we should be eating and drinking and being miyageya in Torah? The akshav ochlan v'shosin upochazin. And now look what we're doing. We're eating, we're drinking, we're doing wasteful things. Ad kan lashono. We're not dealing with Chol Hamoed properly. Therefore, if it was up to me, I would be matir malacha instead of them wasting their time and doing the wrong thing. They'll do malacha. The kosav al-kobo, the kobo writes, Nira mizeh, you see from here, she'isr gadol bischok yosem in malacha. You see, joking around in late sunnis is more chamed than malacha. Because he says, look what they're doing, they're eating and drinking and they're making late sunnis. Better they should be working. So the isr of the schok is worse than the isr of malacha. He'd rather them do malacha. Shekavanas Hashem Yisbarach ben Nesinas Hamoed Hoisa. The whole purpose in HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us Chol Hamoed was Kedei lehidabik b'yiraso v'avoso, that we should connect to Hashem through fear and through love. V'lasok b'soroso atumima akan lashona, to be osek in the Torah Tamima. That's the purpose of Yontif. That's the purpose of Chol Hamoed, to eat, drink, and connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Av and Yira in the Torah, and to be miyageya in Torah. And therefore, we have to realize that ourselves when we have Chol Hamoed. So whether you're wearing Shabbos clothes, you're wearing nicer clothes than during the week, either way, but Lamaisa, the bottom line is the whole purpose of Chol Hamoed is to be eating and drinking and be miyageya b'Torah, not to be having leitzanas and joking around. That's not the avod of Chol Hamoed. We'll stop here, and Mirz Hashem, tomorrow we'll continue with Siman Tov Kuf Lamed Aleph.